Period. So, okay, we'll back up and we'll cover everything we covered in the first 12 sessions. As we've got all the visitors with us, visitors, not visitors, but the class that's been meeting in the fellowship room is now with us. So we'll finish up 2 Corinthians together. Make sure everybody got a worksheet that wants a worksheet. Everybody got a worksheet? All right, let's do a little reading. I probably should have been assigning those while we're waiting on those to get turned out, but we're going to, as you can see from the worksheet, we're going to look at just sections of the last 5 chapters, 9 through 13. The first section is chapter 9, verses 6 through 15. So need a reader for 1 through 9, or 6 through 9 rather, 6 through 9. Who's got that? All right, Sharon, and then 10 through 15. Finish it up, that one section. Let's see, let's get a hand in the air and get this taken care of. All right, Jake, I think that's Jake. It's a head, or yeah, hand behind Dave. All right. Now, before they read for us, I want everybody who was in class to just take a minute and remember everything you've learned so far. And that'll give you a context for what we're about to look at here. All right, if you've done that, let's read. Six through 9, Sharon? Yes. Yes, you're on it.
You can get by, I'll get up.
Now he who supplies seed and sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in everything for all the liberality, which through us is producing thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only fully supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing through many thanksgivings to God. Because of the proof given by this ministry, they will glorify God for your obedience to your confession of the gospel of Christ, for the liberality of your contribution to them and to all, while they also, by prayer on your behalf, govern for you because of the surpassing grace of God in you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift.
Thank you all for the good readings. For those of you who've not been in this class, one of the main things that's taking place in this letter is Paul's defense of his apostleship. He's gotten past some of that to the point where he's now talking to them about a collection that's being made to relieve the saints, and his urging and his encouraging of them to follow through on a commitment that they had made some time back. And so that's what this context is all about. Starting with number 1, this portion of the letter could be called the definitive text on blank and blank. How would you fill in those blanks based on what we've just read? Okay, that's what it involves, giving. Receiving, blessing. How about this? Because sometimes I throw things out there and people look at it and go, what's he talking about there? Sowing and reaping. The definitive text on sowing and reaping. Now that we've established that, Whether we sow blank or blank, we will reap the same. Bountifully or sparingly. Whichever way we sow, we will reap the same. If you read the first chapter of the Bible, the first chapter of Genesis, God is giving us his account of creation. And every time he says that he created living things, he said something about those living things. What did he say? And he said it 10 times. How do they reproduce? After their own kind. As you sow, so shall you reap. That's a physical principle. That's, by the way, one of the things in biology that biologists look at to see if animals are the same species. If they can reproduce with one another, they are the same species. If they can't, they are not. So in biology, that's true. In spiritual things, it's also true. Everything reproduces after its kind. If we sow to the Spirit, we'll reap with the Spirit. If we sow to the flesh, we'll reap with the flesh. If we sow bountifully, we'll reap bountifully. Sparingly, sparingly. We know this is true from Galatians 6 through 10, where Paul writes that God will not be blanked. Has anybody looked at that, or do you remember what Paul says here? Mocked. God will not be mocked, because he ensures that we will reap just as we have sown. What's the involvement of Paul saying God will not be mocked? How does that work? Or how would that work? Here's the way I see it. Somebody sows to the flesh, but they reap to the Spirit or to the good. They sow to the bad, they reap to the good. They turn back in God's face and say, ha, 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 look at me. I sowed to the flesh. I sowed to the bad things, and I still reap the good. So you don't count. And God is saying, I will not be mocked. If you sow it, you're going to reap it. You put it in the ground, it's going to come out at you. And you sow a seed. What comes forth from the seed? Much more than the seed comes out. You plant an acorn, you get an oak tree. Now that works both ways. That's one of the scariest concepts in the universe. It's also one of the most delightful. Because if you sow good, you're going to get a lot of good back. But if you sow bad, you'll get a lot of bad back. Those who give were instructed to give as they had blanked in their hearts. Purposed. This is premeditated giving. Paul promised the Corinthians that bountiful sowing would result in God increasing the harvest of their... Anybody get that? Look at verse 10. The harvest of their righteousness. Righteousness. What is righteousness? Is that just some religious term that has to do with goody two-shoes people? What is righteousness? It is doing what God commands. Is it any more than that? Okay. I think it's a lot more too. Wanting to do right?
Yes, have a giving heart, a loving, kind heart that works to bring others to Christ or to help anybody in need, no matter whether they're good or bad or great.
Right. That's righteousness when you, like Jesus said, we don't really become perfect like God is perfect until we love our enemies. But here's what I think of when I think about this concept of righteousness in the universe. For example, when you get in your car and you turn the key, what's supposed to happen? The motor's supposed to start up. How's that motor supposed to sound? Smooth. Actually, it's best when you don't even hear it at all. It just goes, is this thing running? You got to put your hand on the car. Oh, I think it's running. That's how smooth you want it. I haven't had many vehicles like that. And then when you put it in gear, what's supposed to happen? There's none of this and none of this stuff here when you take off. You go down the road and it's smooth. You let go of the wheel and what does it do? Nothing. It just continues to go in a straight line because everything is in alignment. Everything's working well. Everything's balanced. Everything's in harmony. When Paul writes to the church at Corinth about this kind of righteousness, that's the circumstance he's talking about. He's not talking about just, oh, I'm good. No, it's about being right, being aligned, being in balance and in harmony with God. And when you're in balance and harmony with God, everything in your life is going to be positively affected. And to the extent that something in our life is not aligned with God, things in our life are going to be negatively impacted. So that's what we're looking at here. And keep in mind, nobody talked more about this dichotomy of the things of the world and the things of the Spirit than Jesus. He said, you cannot serve God and mammon. And when I was a kid, I thought, why didn't he say God and the devil? Because aren't those the two great opposed forces in the universe? Well, not really. I don't know anybody, personally, I really don't know anybody who wants to serve the devil, but I know a lot of people who want to serve mammon, material gain, the things of the world. And so that's why these things are juxtaposed like that. All right. He further said, this is the third line of the second part of number 1. Yeah, we're going to get through this worksheet today. He further said that they would be enriched in blank. Anybody get that? Everything, from verse 11, be enriched in everything, and that their liberality was producing much thanksgiving to God. So God's getting the thanks because of what they're doing. How do you think God feels about that? That's what Paul's writing about, is God's being impacted, if you will, by what they have done because other people are giving thanks because of what they've done. The apostle also wrote that those impacted by their liberality would blank God specifically for their obedience to their blank of the blank of Christ. Boy, that's a lot of blanks. Glorify God. That's what we put in that first blank. The apostle also wrote that those impacted by their liberality would glorify God, specifically for their obedience to their confession of, their faith in the gospel. How does that work? Okay, by their fruits you shall know them. They've confessed their faith in Christ and in his gospel. And it's not just the death, burial, and resurrection. That's how Paul presents the gospel in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 1 through 4. He says, I delivered the gospel to you, and the death, burial, and resurrection is what he outlined, is what he had delivered. But in this context, he's letting us know that there's more to the gospel than just the death, burial, and resurrection. It's the whole gambit. It's everything about the righteousness of Christ, which is getting back to the theme that he introduced just a little bit ago. All right, what is the indescribable gift Paul mentions in 9:15? God's grace. And the grace that God has given them is being manifested, being made clear by their liberality. God's grace has come to them. God has been giving and giving and giving. And even before he made man, he gave to man. He provided for man. He provided the whole universe, a beautiful world, all the animals, all the colors, all the sounds. Everything in the universe was for us. And then he made us and put us in it. And that is all part of the grace of God. And then he finally gave his son. Number 2, chapter 10, verses 1 through 7. I need somebody to read 1 through 4 and somebody to read 5 through 7. Who's got 1 through 4? Let's get a hand up here. Let's not waste time. All right, Robin, 1 through 4 and 5 through 7. Who's got that one? Judy. Yes, sorry.
By the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I approach you, not all good, and good, in the face of you, but oh, what a way, and then you die right on earth, and on God's feet.
And every finite thing that is raised up against the knowledge of God, taking every thought captive to obey Christ. And we are ready to punish any disobedience once your obedience has been confirmed. Look at what is obvious. If anyone is confident that he belongs to Christ, he should remind himself of this. Just as he belongs to Christ, so do we.
Very good. And I'll note for these answers are all keyed to the New American Standard. So if you're not using a New American Standard, it might be a little more difficult to find the exact wording. But you'll find something that will fit and be right. Paul urges the Corinthians to be obedient by the blank and the blank of Christ. Meekness and gentleness of Christ. So he's urging them based on Christ being meek and Christ being gentle. You guys be meek, you be gentle. What does meek mean, by the way? What is the definition of meek? That's exactly what it is. It's power under control. When you see a long freight train and you look up at the front, there are locomotives, extremely powerful locomotives, but they stay on a very narrow track. What happens if they get off that track? They don't go anywhere. But all that power on that track is able to be applied to do the job. And that's what meekness is. It's power on track, under control. And that's what we're looking at with Christ, and that's what Paul says the church at Corinth and we ought to be by implication. He also wrote to say that while we walk in the blank, we do not blank according to the flesh. Walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. Now, keep in mind, when Paul talks about the flesh, when we read about the flesh in the New Testament, we're generally talking about everything of the world, everything of the created world. That's the flesh. What was Adam made from? Dirt. And so the part of us that is the body, the part of us that is the flesh, longs for the things of the world. We're created from it. We long for those things, even with regard to the abstracts of how to make war. We're going to make war according to the flesh. We're going to take the things of this world and we're going to create bombs and missiles and swords and spears and arrows, and we're going to take the things of this world that we've made to make war, and we're going to wage war. And Paul says, not us, because we're not of the world. We're of heaven. And our warfare is a spiritual warfare. Very big difference. The weapons of our warfare are mighty indeed to destroy what? What's in the context here? I'm looking at verse 4. The weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses, is what I have in the New American Standard. Fortresses, to destroy forts. Very good. Strongholds. The bastions of the lies. Will also destroy, not just destroy fortresses, but destroy, my translation has speculations. What is a speculation? It's an argument based on this is what I think happened. It's a theory, and sometimes not even a theory. It's interesting when you look at science, there are certain things that a theory has to have to be a theory. And if it doesn't have those things, it doesn't even qualify to be a theory. Guess what doesn't even qualify to be a theory according to science? Evolution. We talk about the theory of evolution. Well, scientifically, it doesn't even qualify to be a theory. But that's one of those we speculate that there was no God, that the universe just came into being out of nothing, and from this nothing that was not alive, somehow life came to be, and that life ate something. We don't know what it ate, because it was the first life. What would the first life eat? I don't know. How would it reproduce? Well, you see, we've already passed that question. We're beyond that. These are just speculations and the truth of the Word of God, and reasoning with science, with real science, will cast down these speculations, as well as destroying every lofty thing raised up against the blank, blank, blank. Every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God is what we've got. And I realize that some of the translations are different. It is powerful and able to take blank, blank captive to the obedience of Christ. Every thought. What does that mean, take every thought captive? It means no matter what you think of, no matter what idea you come up with, no matter what direction you want to go, everything has to come back to truth. And all of that truth is from Christ. Everything has to be weighed by that truth. This is especially true with the church. It's true of all the universe, but it's true of the church. As Paul wrote in Ephesians, the church is established on the chief cornerstone, who is Christ, and that's what the purpose of the chief cornerstone is. Everything else is gauged by that cornerstone. However it lays, that's how the rest of the building will lay. But it's not just Jesus, it's him that just as the chief cornerstone and his apostles and prophets. And he put his word in them, they preached his word, so that's where the idea comes with the foundation of the church. Based on the above facts, Paul essentially urges the saints not to look at things, and this is in verse 7. Don't look at things outwardly. Outwardly. There's much more to life than what appears outwardly. Number 3, chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. Man, we're moving on. We've covered 2 chapters. 1 through 6. I need a reader for 1 through 3. Anybody who's literate in English qualifies? Steve? And Leanne? Leanne, if you'll get 4 through 6.
I wish that you would bear with me. Indeed, you are very good. For I am jealous. For you would. God is jealous. Jealous. For I'm thrilled with you. You want to manifest in Christ. I commend you as your word. But I'm afraid it says, servant see thee by the characters. Mine should be as a way, with the purity devoted to Christ.
Very good. In what does Paul claim to have done for the Corinthians in this context? What's he say he's done for them? Okay, he's presented them or betrothed them to one. He's arranged this marriage. And it's not like our connotation perhaps of an arranged marriage. This is a great arrangement. Marvelous arrangement. And this is what Paul says he's done. But he does, and I didn't put this in the outline in the worksheet. He says, I'm jealous for you with a godly jealousy. Is there such thing as a godly jealousy? I thought jealousy was sinful. Okay, covetousness. And we all know what covetousness is because we all use that concept, so we don't talk about that much anymore, do we? But that's absolutely right. Covetousness is sinful, to want something somebody else has. You're not concerned for their welfare, you're concerned for yours, and so you want it. This is related to jealousy. Sharon, I'm sorry, did I cut you off? What were you saying?
No, I don't know what I was saying.
I can relate. I think the jealousy he's talking about here, we can all relate to, those of us at least who are married. You have a wife, you have a husband. One of the things that we often hear at a wedding ceremony is, forsaking all others, give myself to you. That's the idea. When you go back on that, godly jealousy had better be part of the equation. Because once you are given to someone else, they're the only one who has a right to you. And God has the only right to his people. And when his people start chasing after other gods or other concepts or other ideas, this is why Paul's talking about spiritual warfare. Others have come into the church at Corinth and said, well, now Paul's not really an apostle, but we're apostles. He doesn't have authority, but we have authority. We're going to talk to you about a different Christ or a different gospel or a different teaching, something that comes from somewhere other than the authorized apostles of Jesus Christ. And Paul says, That's like some man messing with another man's wife. What do you expect the husband to do in that case? Okay, we're Christians, so we don't want to say it, but we know what we would expect. We know the sentiments that would be, that would come to the surface, and that's the way it should be. All right, where are we here? What fear does he express for the saints, and what historical context does he use to illustrate this fear? This is number 3 under that long line. What fear does he express for the saints? That they'll be led astray. And what's the historical context he gives that will illustrate their being led astray in this case? Eve being led astray by the serpent. He later says, and I didn't include this in the worksheet, but it's an excellent part of this letter that really stands out. If you drop down to verse 13, 13 to get the context a little better. For such men are false apostles, this is 2 Corinthians 11:13, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Therefore, it is not surprising if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness, whose end will be according to their deeds. Getting back to the sowing and reaping idea. Their end is going to be according to what they've sown. They're going to reap it. Sadly, back to the worksheet, the ones they are accused of receiving beautifully are those who preach another. Actually, in this blank, it would be Christ. The next one would be gospel, offering a different gospel than what they had received. Who preach another Christ, offering a different gospel, even offering a different do you get it? Spirit. A different spirit. Remember when Jesus was passing through Samaria with the apostles and the Samaritans would not receive them? What did the apostles want to do? Let's call down fire from heaven like God did with Elisha. Burn these people up. And what did Jesus say? He said, you don't know what spirit you're of. I did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. Oh, that's a different way to think. Very different way to think. Incidentally, who's the judge of the universe? That would be God. The God who sent his son did not send his son to be the judge. God maintains that authority. And so he says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. I didn't send my son to repay, I'm going to repay. And so Jesus is trying to teach the apostles, don't you set yourselves up to be the judge. I didn't come to be the judge, I came to be a savior. You work with me in saving humanity and leave the judgment up to God. Now Jesus didn't say all that in that context, but if you look through the rest of the scriptures, that's true. This is why we should never be afraid not to bring judgment against people if it's not in our authority to do so. Because who's going to do it? God will do it. Everything will eventually be made right one way or another. All in good time. All in good time. Jesus didn't do it. He doesn't expect us to do it. Back page. Are we on the back page? Really? Oh, wait a minute. I missed one. Had to know it. The apostle mentioned that he was unskilled in speech, but not in knowledge. Not in knowledge. I still would have liked to have heard him. And look forward to it one of these days. Number 4, chapter 11, verses 21 to 28. Need a reader for 21 to 24. Who's got it? Let's get a hand up. Steve? And I saw another hand in the back, did I? Yes. Mark, if you'll get the rest of that. 21 to 24 and then 25 to 28.
Whatever anyone else bears the fault of, I am speaking of the full. I also bear the fault of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? So am I.
Yep, 23 or 20, either one of you can pick it up there and finish.
Are they servants of Christ? I'm a better one. I am talking about madness, far greater labor, far more imprisonment, countless beatings, and often near death.
5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship, through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Apart from such external things, there is the daily pressure on me of concern for all of the churches.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. What had Paul experienced while preaching the gospel? Was given 39 stripes from the Jews. How many times? You just go right down through the text, and we can just enumerate all these things. 5 times. You ever thought about being hit 39 times? How many times is 5 times 39? That's way more than I want to be hit. And that's what Paul had suffered. He was beaten with rods how many times? 3 times beaten with rods. With stripes, you're limited to 39. Actually, you were limited to 40. The law said 40. But the Jews backed off one because they didn't want to break the law and do too many. So they hit 39. Okay. Boy, that's a whole lot better than 40, right? But beaten with rods, there's no limit. Stoned. How many times was he stoned? 1 time. Stoned and left for dead. He was shipwrecked how many times? 3 times he was shipwrecked. Spent a night and a day in the deep, floating somewhere on the ocean. Frequent journeys. Now, why did I put that in there? Frequent. We think about journeys. Hey, no big deal. We hop in the car, we drive to Arkansas. How many hours does that take us? 2 or 3 hours, depending on traffic. And what temperature will it be? Whatever you want. You got an air conditioner if it's hot. You got a heater if it's cold. If it's raining, no big deal. If you want something to eat, what do? Well, you pull off at any of 100 different places that sell food. You've got highway patrol. You've got fire department. You've got emergency responders with EMS if anything happens. You stop at Walmart and shop if you get bored of driving. That's a favorite thing to do, is it not, for all of us? Just stop at Walmart and buy something you don't need. Get back in the car and go on your way. Ice cream, everything. What did they have like that when Paul journeyed? Probably nothing like any of the things, the amenities we've got today. And so, yes, he was in journeys. And it was more than what we might think of. Dangers from, and then there are 8 of these. Dangers from rivers, robbers, his own countrymen, Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. All these different dangers. I'm looking at this, and the more I think of this stuff, the more I sort of, what have I suffered for the cause of Christ? What have we been through? How many of us would like to get up and testify about the sufferings that we've endured? Somebody said something bad about me because I was a Christian. Where's my Kleenex here? I'm not saying that people don't suffer for the cause of Christ. I'm saying we should thank God for the freedom we have in this country and for the opportunity we have to do good without being persecuted the way Paul was. He had been in both blank and in blank. Hunger and thirst. Hunger and thirst for the cause of Christ. He had been through many, what's this here? Sleepless nights, cold and exposure, burdened with the care of that's the last thing he puts down. With all these other things, I'm always worried about what's going on with the churches, and with good cause. Number 5, let's, for sake of time, we'll dispense with the reading. I hate to do that, but a bell has rung. Paul wrote that because of the surpassing greatness of the blank that he received, and that's revelations. Paul was receiving revelations from the Lord. That's how he knew what he knew. He was given a blank in the blank, a thorn in the flesh. What was the thorn in the flesh? Nobody knows. We don't even know the nature of it. Was it a physical malady in his literal flesh, or was it a spiritual problem that he struggled with that was based on the desire of the flesh? Because he's always talking about the desire of the flesh. We don't know. Did he have some urge? All of us have urges for one thing or another. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was sickness. It's been speculated that it was an eye problem because he did apparently have eye trouble, and he had to write with large letters, and other people were he dictated to others. At any rate, he had some issue that was just right for him to keep him from, this torment was to keep him from exalting himself. So it had to be some kind of humiliating problem. He asked the Lord blank times, 3 times, to remove it from him, but was told by Jesus, "My blank is sufficient for you. My grace is sufficient for you, for blank is perfected in weakness." Strength, power. What's that mean? Strength is perfected in weakness. Okay. When do you know if somebody is a good surgeon? Okay? You got to have somebody with a really bad surgical problem. No, that doesn't sound surgical problem. A problem that requires a really good surgeon. And if you got some mess in your body and nobody knows how to take care of it but this one guy, and once he takes care of it, you go, that guy knows what he's doing. Well, how do you know what he's doing? Because he took care of the issue. The power of God is perfected in our weakness. It's completed. So the next time you're weak, thank God. And you'll have to be telling me the same thing. The next time I get sick, you're going to have to say, "Marty, remember, God's power is perfected in weakness." The next time I'm tired, the next time I'm hungry, remind me, God's power is perfected in weakness. Chapter 13, 1-5, the apostle's next visit would be his... You looking at 13? Third. So he's been there twice. I know math. He promised that when he came, he would not blank anyone. He's not going to spare anyone. And he took this stance to prove that he will not be blanked among them as blank is working in him. And when you look at the context, since you are seeking for proof of the Christ, this is verse 3, who speaks in me, who is not weak toward you, but mighty in you. And now I can't remember what I was going to put in that blank. I know Christ is the second blank. He will not be weak. Okay, yeah, let's put weak in there. That does fit very well. So that must be what I was thinking. In closing, Paul urged the Corinthians to blank themselves. And this is examine or test in verse 5 to see whether they were in the faith. And there's the question we're left with. What would we look for to see if we are in the faith? Are you a faithful Christian? Well, what would you look at? What would you examine? What would you enumerate? If you had to put it on paper, what would you write down that shows you're a faithful Christian? That's essentially what he's saying to the Corinthians. Thank you for being here. Sorry we had to get 5 chapters covered in one class period, but we did it. Lord bless you. Class dismissed.